Hello there, and welcome back to the DM's Book Club, a place where two motley, absent-minded people get together and attempt to dissect the rules of D&D by picking chapters apart and strangely sounding coherent about it, which very rarely happens, but hopefully is entertaining nonetheless. My name is Ryan. It is a pleasure to have you here again, and I have with me the fabulous and ever just knowing and brilliant and whatever. I'm just making you uncomfortable. I can see your face getting really uncomfortable with this sort of treatment. It's Fee. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Normally when I get lots of compliments, it means they either want something or I've done something wrong, and I can never tell.
But it's funny you should say that because, you know, I did need a favor.
Right.
It is a little bit financial, but
Cool.
we'll talk about that later. It's fine.
Cool.
You're great, by the way. You're brilliant.
Great.
I'd say that.
Hooray.
No, but we genuinely have a quite interesting topic to talk about today. I think we just dive straight into it. Do you want to give us a little bit of a rundown about roughly what we're talking about?
Absolutely. So today I thought, you know, we've had our time with multiclassing and like, hooray, etc. I thought, well, we've just come from a brand new book, so let's turn about and go back into it. So yes, today we're going to look again at Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, because Tasha has been known for that one. It's like, oh, you can be whatever you want, and you throw the rule book back at the players, or the players throw it back at the DM. It's like, look, I can be anything. And he's like, that's true. But what's also cool is that towards the end of Tasha's is that there's quite a few new little bits and pieces, some new little bits of what I would describe as weird hazards to throw in your settings at players. And I just love it. I just love that sort of like having more sort of things that you go, oh, that's really cool. Where can I add that into my campaigns? And oh, that's a cool new hazard, essentially. So we're going to look at today magical phenomena, which is pages 163 to 169. And basically, I just thought that the first paragraph was actually quite interesting, that the magic has the ability to make even the most serene natural settings unpredictable. And I think there's just something very powerful about that sentence, because when we treat role-playing campaigns, and I know not every single high fantasy setting will include magic to the same extent that the Forgotten Realms does, but because it's such an unknown to us, and we've talked about like artificers using it to enhance sort of their own scientific discoveries and all that sort of thing. For most realms, magic is seen as an unstable, unpredictable element that only a few people can control. But even then, that knowledge of expertise is so small and it's only just beginning. So to see magic sort of in its natural environment and having an effect on the environment and being something which is like unpredictable, so you could be dangerous, it might not be dangerous. I just thought that's such a cool idea, and one that we haven't necessarily explored much before. So I thought we might have a quick look at that and see the 7 different phenomena that it has suggested that we can include in our campaigns.
Yeah, the line at the end that says they range from whimsical to deadly is very true, because some of these things I would describe as being quite even pleasant or random, or just would spice up a campaign or in just a random setting with a little bit of imagination or randomness or something. And some of these things look utterly terrifying and horrific. And I mean, there's one that I know you will love, and we'll get to that later, but there are some amazingly cool ideas here. And actually, one point, again, podcast, very difficult to display visual medium on this, but some of the artwork in this book is just incredible. And this chapter is no different, because some of these drawings are just delightful. Why don't we start off with, I guess, probably maybe one of the easiest things to sort of imagine, the Eldritch Storm, which I just have this idea in my head as being this combination of a weather system and something else, or some sort of other effect. So do you want to give us some idea about what these are?
Absolutely. So we have covered storms as a hazard in general in one of the earlier chapters. We talked about ship's combat and some of the hazards, environmental hazards you have there. And it does talk about the different kinds of magical storms. So with the different schools of thought, schools of magic and stuff like that. So it's not a new concept having storms which are magical, but what sort of makes them stand out from sort of this is that it talks about magic currents becoming trapped amidst winds and clouds, and it happening almost like, if you imagine like a twister or a tornado, and then these things start to appear. So they talk about, I believe it's I've got to count, there's 4 different types of eldritch storms that can appear. You have flay winds, which are like these super powerful supernatural winds that come from other planes, like the Oh no. Ah, oh my God, I can't even do it a second time. The plane of pandemonium. We've talked about it very briefly before, the sort of the screaming howls and stuff. And here it's described almost like as an intense sandstorm. And it just powers through the land, again, heavily obscuring things. Anyone that's caught in it gets a 1d4 slashing damage at the start of each turn. And it's like a lot of information about all the destruction it leaves behind and how long it can last. It's
like a terrible dust storm. You can imagine this in a huge desert or across some sort of wild American plain where you look over and suddenly there's this wall of wind and sand appearing from a direction. Maybe it's got a face, as you say. Maybe it looks more like a twister or a tornado. But before you know it, you're totally surrounded and you're being buffeted by things that are being picked up. I feel like it is, like a sort of dusty tornado would be the best way to describe this one, because it's picking things up. You're being hit by rocks, maybe the odd cow that's being picked up. I just like that image. It's always heard in the horror movies, isn't there? The tornado that picks up a cow that goes past and goes, as it flies by in the wind.
Create that little bit of comic relief in what is a scary moment. Absolutely. And well, for me, this is the point where I can't remember what the exact name is called, but there's a board game called Forbidden Desert, I think it is. Like there's like one called Forbidden Island, and it's a similar sort of concept where you're one of several players who have to find stuff to create their escape to get out of there. But with Forbidden Desert, there is just a huge sandstorm and you have to find areas of shelter, otherwise the sun beats down on you and all these sort of things. And that's what I sort of see a Flaywind. It's just a really intense sandstorm that just keeps going and leaves and covers up everything in its wake. So it actually will probably become like difficult terrain. There's actually a lot of information about the stuff it leaves behind, presumably because it's such a fast wind that just blows through the party. So I think, again, if I was something going to incorporate into my games, it's something I would be like, it's more what happens after it hits you. Like if it hits you, it'll hit you for a lot of damage and it might take a while for it to blow itself out. It's like 1d4 times 10 hours. So it could be around for up to 40 hours in game time. So that's
a lot of 1d4 slashing damages at the beginning of your turns. That's,
exactly.
You got to hunker down and get out of this. I like to think you could describe the natural environment in an area where these things happen really well, because the players would encounter this large sweeping field where there's no features, there's no buildings or trees or anything standing still apart from really, really smoothed rock and carved out sort of artifacts of geology of some kind, and all of the sand everywhere. Like everything just looks too smooth and too perfect. And they're thinking, why does this look like no one's ever crossed this before? And then one of these storms hits and resets everything. And you think, that's why. That's quite normal, isn't it? Give us something more magical.
More magical? Oh, okay. What about, you like fire and you like storms. What about you put them together? So the next sort of entry, I guess, in these sort of Eldritch Storms is a flame storm. So sooty thunderclouds shot through with red and orange lightning streak releases a deluge of fiery droplets, which is like, amazing. For this, I would imagine this would be happening maybe around lairs, maybe around or on Avernus in one of the levels of hell, with sort of more environmental hazards where it's a phenomenon which is scary. But again, I would not say this compared to, say, Flaywinds, where you can say, big open areas. I'd be like, this would be a certain set of circumstances to have flame storms. But again, you have the same thing at the beginning of each turn, 2d6 fire damage. Any flammable objects which aren't being worn or carried set alight. Disadvantage on perception checks and ranged attacks as well, because the winds are buffering you around and you can't see anything because of the sooty smoke. But here, this only lasts for 2d4 minutes, which makes sense. It's like nobody would be able to survive anything longer, I don't think. But again, is that enough of a hazard for people to run and keep going? And so maybe tracking a couple of rounds of it during combat, or being able to find shelter, or being able to protect themselves in some way, if it's via, say, Mordecaiden's mansion or a bubble of some kind as well.
Yeah, I like to think of this as having a planar effect. As you say, you've got all these different planes that you might see it. Maybe Limbo is the other one I could think of, the chaotic plane where things like this, or pandemonium, or maybe the elemental plane of fire. But
yes,
it wasn't until recently, the last couple of years, where the other thing that I was thinking of was when we saw all of the horrendous firestorms in Australia and California, and that effect where there's so much fire and so much ash in the air that it creates its own weather systems, which I didn't realize was a thing. I forget the exact phrase of it, but in Australia, they get storms that are made from dust clouds rather than from actual Earth-like behavior, and they will have lightning and they rain ash and they whip up these insanely inferno-like winds. So yeah, you could see this as a natural effect as much as anything, or as you say, the effect of a dragon of some kind. Like, oh.
Yeah, that's so true. I'd completely forgot about the horrific Australian fires, which obviously was happening this time last year. But obviously time is an illusion right now for all of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, the LA fires with people setting off gender reveal parties and then just starting these huge fires by accident. It would be really cool to incorporate that. If you weren't taking your campaigns to other planes of existence, so obviously the plane of fire, absolutely great example there where this sort of hazard probably could pop up. But yeah, just having that, just a really hot summer, it's just a lot of dry foliage and farming equipment or whatever suddenly spark, and having this environmental disaster to work with, that'd be such an interesting couple of sessions to work around. I love that. I really love that. But okay, you want something more magical, fine, I understand. What about a death storm?
So tell me more. This feels like absolutely horrific in some way.
Yes. So again, we have spoken a little bit about storms, which are like necromantic in some sense. Again, I think episode about ships, there is talk of like having a ship that is full of dead people. It's completely undead, has an undead crew, has a necrotic ways about it. And this sort of just adds to it. I see this sort of example of the necrotic tempest as a sort of storm that you would see on the seas, perhaps. So it is storms that are infused with the essence of death, and they roil with dark clouds that manifest with leering skulls and bone-white lightning. And again, I can just imagine that you're on the seas and that the darkness comes in and you will know you're in spooky ghost ship territory, man. You're not getting out of there. But the big thing about this one is that you have to do, at the end of each minute whilst you're in the storm, a DC 13 Constitution saving throw, or take 3d6 necrotic damage. So that's the end of every minute. And the longer you're in it, it gets worse and worse. And then if you die in it, any creatures that die in it will become a skeleton or a zombie 1d10 minutes later. The storm itself lasts for a number of days, and it does say that it leaves everything in its wake. Again, that sort of debris, that sort of effect. So if it is going over land, crops get withered, water becomes undrinkable for a certain number of days. So that it just shows how deadly this kind of storm is. It affects everything. And I just think it's so cool.
Being able to bring back things as skeletons and zombies, though, is horrifying, because people think when they see skeleton or zombie, you think, oh, the challenge rating quarter little skelly boy with his little short sword that comes and pokes you. But no, don't forget, in D&D, skeletons and zombies can be applied to any creature, including the absolutely terrifying picture of what appears to be some sort of huge sea serpent attacking a ship, which is just rather scary. I mean, the artwork here is so cool. Little skulls in the sky as well. Oh, dear.
Yeah, fun fact, that picture I do have as a desktop picture that comes up every so often on my thing. So often when I'm finishing out, and I'll just close the screen and go, oh, it's okay. It's not real. But yeah, that having stuff like that, undead, maybe like a kraken or undead dragon turtles or anything like that, that become a zombie-esque sort of thing. And it's just that whole needs sort of shut down for food or for killing. And I just, scary.
It's absolutely horrific. And just as horrific is the last option, which, because this one resonated with me a little bit, because in our campaign, we've done huge amounts of you players having to scale to very high altitude and into cold environments quite a lot. And this one seems horrific.
Yeah, so this one's called, and I know I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, Frims Howl.
That's brilliant.
Oh, good. Hooray. So yeah, cold, chilling blizzards that drive a wall of wind and snow like a living glacier. So again, that sort of idea that you're looking out onto a very clear horizon, probably at the top of a mountain or something like that, and you could just see, looking down into the valley, like this storm coming in that is just moving at such a glacial pace, moving through. And it's just... It talks about extreme cold, which I had to look up for. And we've done, again, like you said, in our campaign, that at the end of each day, you have to do a Constitution DC 10 check to see if we are hearty enough to get through the extreme cold or gain a level of exhaustion. Yeah. With this storm, you get, at the start of each turn, 2d6 cold damage. And most importantly, you can't regain hit points until you've spent at least 1 hour in a warm environment, which is unlikely if you're in a very snowy place up a mountain. The other thing to note is that if you die, you freeze solid. Probably seen it on, I can't remember which book it is, but it is like someone in the process of being frozen solid by a dragon, I think, or something like that. And it's just like, gone. These storms can last for 2 to 10 hours. So again, over a long period of time where you might not be able to take a long rest because you've not got the shelter and stuff. So you have to power through. It's just,
It's horrifying. Anything that stops a party from being able to heal is a terrifying idea, because I don't know, is there a sense of complacency that comes with parties sometimes when they've got clerics and healing ability because they think, oh, well, yes, there's this poison arrows just hit me, but I can restore poison and I can heal wounds and everything's fine. And that first realization where they've taken some cold damage and they say, well, I'm just going to quickly cure wounds as I look around for somewhere to hide. And you say, no, it does not work. You are so cold that you don't heal anything. And you think, oh, this is terrifying. Like,
yeah, I think it's something definitely at lower levels. Obviously, you get hit a lot, and then you're like, oh, we need to rest something out. And then also, as you progress to higher levels, then you're more likely to having to encounter several different things in a day before you can rest again. And I like the idea. It's like, okay, well, it's fine. We can take a quick short rest and then we can power through. But here, I can just imagine if it was actually happening, if you were at the adventuring party and you have to power through all these kinds of storms, just the level of intensity and stuff. Like, it's, I don't know how you would run them per se, because this is something that it's a combat sort of situation. Maybe you'd have to take like, okay, what are people doing? But maybe do it on like, okay, this lasts a whole day. We're going to do, I don't know, 4 phases. So what are you doing in the first phase? You know, what is the thing that you're helping you survive a storm? And then taking that as checks, a bit like, again, I know I keep referring back to it, but in the ship episode, we talked about crew morale. So the idea that everyone is contributing something, and then if they make the check, it's like 2 checks over out of a possible 4, they pass and they don't get a worse benefit for it, if you see what I mean. And I think that happens with the environmental hazards as well on that one. And all that is in the Saltmarsh book, Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Yeah,
all the books are starting to link in with themselves now. And don't forget, as a DM, you have the choice to make these rules tweaked and how they apply a little bit in your own campaign. It's your baby, really. You can do whatever you want with it. But those are all horrific Eldritch Storms. Indeed. And from that point, we go into other effects, which I think are still hazards. And certainly one of them is definitely a hazard. But a lot of them have a lot of variability and chaos to them, which I quite enjoy. And the next category is called emotional echoes, which I find this idea really, really cool. So, like, how do you imagine these things work?
Yeah, as you said, all these different phenomena, you get the environmental, like, oh, this is going to be lots of damaging, to the ones that are more descriptive, and I would say more psychological, that, you know, to add that flavor to the story. So emotional echoes are places that have been infused with powerful emotions from those who've once dwelt there, who worked there, who celebrated or suffered there. And it's usually one big common emotion. So for me, instantly you think of any ghost stories where whatever's haunting the place is sort of imbued within the walls itself. A great sort of example, which is not necessarily horror-based, because again, it talks about these different types of emotions you can have that aren't necessarily bad emotions. They're just such an intense and passionate emotion. Is in the film Anastasia, the animated film Anastasia, there is a moment where she is in the old ballroom and she imagines, like, she starts to dance with the ghosts, and you just see this whole thing turning and becoming a beautiful, beautiful place. She remembers or feels what it was like to be at a party. And it was just that sort of thing is what I see, is that you get glimpses or snapshots of stuff that happened in this place that resonated to it. And a lot of the times, if you think back to Japanese ghost stories, is that when someone dies in anger, their ghost lives on and haunts those that come and disturbs their peace, all that sort of thing. Whereas I think what's cool about it, it gives several different examples of different kinds of emotions that you can embody in certain places and add that to the story, whether or not that is like the main central point of a story. Maybe you're going to visit a haunted house because there's been some disturbances, or you're going to say, for example, there's examples of battlefields. You're going through it and you feel senses of boldness, and you can see, or you get dreams of people going into battle and having this sort of victory sense. the main sort of mechanic element of it, I will say, is that once per day, if a creature at any point expresses even the hint of the emotion that has been put into this place, and this place can be as small as a little room, or it can be as big as a forest, which I thought was good. So again, it doesn't have to be constricted to buildings. So if they do that once per day, they have to do a DC 16 check for suggestions, because the place will be like, we'll see that emotion and want them to hang on to them and keep them there. Essentially, for them to perform or to act out this emotion. And this spell effect, if they fail, lasts for 24 hours. But that's kind of it. For me, when I see stuff when it's suggestion and it's something that is powerful enough to make people want to act out feelings that are not necessarily themselves, I probably would have included something like they will be unwilling to leave and want to get back to it. We've talked about it before with some of the Outer Planes, is that when you leave, you have to make a check. If you fail it, you always want to go back there, and there's a longing to go back there. So I thought I would include that into this one.
I guess the advantage to how they've worded it is because it's the effect of a suggestion spell. You as a DM get to maybe include that into the subtext of the suggestion. Like you could say, I suggest that you linger here and explain this or do this or whatever it may be. And you've got a little bit of flexibility. But the thing I love about these ideas is that it's not necessarily always evil. Like you could see this effect being brought into a horror campaign or some sort of thriller campaign where you've got a ghost haunting, the site of a murder, a massacre of some kind that gives you that feeling of either fear or hatred or something, or even horror. Horror is not necessarily put down as one of these, but you could see a sanity or horror inducing sort of effect here. But it's also good effects or happy effects or joyous effects, but if anything are just as bad, because a player being compelled to stay in an area and just be happy may be a terrible thing if makes them get lost or forget about a very important mission, or they're chasing somebody, or there's some sort of time critical issue, and before you know it, they've spent 24 hours reminiscing about something, and suddenly they're like, what happened? Why am I still here? And it's too late to do anything. It's very interesting. I like things that have a twinge of both good and bad to them, like a feeling where some sort of happy feeling could be as problematic as pure horror.
So some of the common echoes that are here, like you said, there is the fear one where you have overwhelming feelings of dread, and you have to face your darkest fears and all that sort of thing. So this is all by the by. My favorite ones, again, like you said, the more positive ones. So you have ones of love, which they suggest that you would have this on like huge long beaches or in orchards, somewhere that is sort of very, very beautiful. And these feelings are to encourage confessions of love, but also for people to endlessly list their favorite things, which I thought, oh my God, that's so fun. Just to, again, that sort of a way to, I hate using the word manipulate, but to sort of impart or put on players a trait if they're really into their role playing. So it's like, well, you're going to do this. And I think that's the thing with echoes, is that there's not necessarily anything negative, like they're not going to get any damage from it, from staying here. But you're right, the time sensitive thing of their story could really be impacted on here, but also they could reveal stuff about themselves, like a boldness one, like I said before, like battlefields and canyons, where they suddenly just shout hidden truths about themselves or act out greatest victories and at getting that other side of them. I just, for me, obviously, like you said, for me, I see this as more of a horror thing to do. So I was thinking of stuff like when you go in Phasmophobia, when you go into the house and you're trying to find out evidence of why the ghost is here and stuff, or having flashbacks and having that sort of sense that you can smell the perfume as the lady puts on before she goes on to the ball. You hear the whispers or something like that, and just creating that little bit of flavor to stuff. I just thought any part of the campaign where you want to have a hint to a ghost story or a hint to something intense or an important event that happened in the past, the emotional echo is such a good choice for this.
It really is. And I say the size of the place, the environment, everything is totally to your imagination as to how this sort of has been put in. And maybe even something your party does creates an emotional echo at some point for another campaign or another sort of set of effects. The sight of heroic battle or victory that your players achieves by beating the big bad could well create one of these spaces for somebody else going forward.
That's so cool. Yeah,
I like just stringing things together like that. But of course we have more to talk to, and now we have Enchanted Springs, which is the next sort of, again, this gives me the image of more of a paradise-esque, natural, Fae-inspired place rather than anything that has a picture of a horrific sea serpent skeleton attacking a ship, which is pretty cool in the Eldritch Storm section. But yeah, this seems like one of those things that should be a really, really good thing to find, but then has sort of an element of corruption that could come with it as well. So do you want to tell us more about Enchanted Springs?
Absolutely. So yes, Enchanted Springs are basically areas or places that are brimmed over with miraculous waters, whether they tap into sort of some magical sources beneath the earth or have been blessed by eldritch beings. And again, if you think about anything that's been described about the Feywild or Fey creatures, that's what the sort of image you're getting here. That is a very beautiful or picturesque place where I guess I would almost call it like a mirage in a way. That you see this, it's absolutely beautiful, very, very enticing, but there could always be an element of like, well, why is this here? What is the purpose of this? What is the hidden motive? And that's what it sort of talks about, and that's what you sort of alluded to, is that sometimes these places can be tainted, either polluted by like an evil entity or through some other means. And I think that is so cool, because again, you have those fairy tales, you have those folklore stories about people drinking from the thing, but then a curse befalling them. What I imagine here, and I'm sure you do too, is when you think of like a natural hot spring. So you think of like those ones in Norway, or even the sort of more man-made ones in Japan, where it's just absolutely beautiful. Like, again, you could be in a forest or you could be overlooking something. I remember recently playing Ghosts of Teshima, where one of the things that you go and bathe in natural hot springs, but you're overlooking absolutely gorgeous like sunsets. That's what I see here. There's a place of peace and a place of serenity. And you get certain benefits if you drink it, or if you bathe in it, do anything with the water, you will get some sort of effect, which you can roll for using a D12. Yeah. But for me, there's a couple of things that are interesting from it, is that there is probably some protectors around. So obviously if you come and like, well, I want to drink from the fountain of life, there's probably some sort of test, or there are probably some guardians to stop you doing that, or to stop people taken away from it. Because probably you have heard of myths of like, oh, well, there's this place in the forest we can all go bathe in. One line in this, it says, if you bottle any of the water from the springs, there is no magical properties unless you have a specially prepared vial that has been blessed by the being that created this place, which I think is so important, because I think a lot of adventurers may go, this is perfect, I can have this and keep this later. If you're going to bathe or you're going to drink the waters from this magical spring, you do it now. You don't have a chance to come back later, or a chance to keep the stuff what you've done later, which I think happens to a lot of us. I think we get stuff, we're like, great, and then you dump it in your bag of holding, and then later on you go, what else have we got in here? Oh shit, I'll use this now. And this could be several sessions down the line when your DM goes, that was supposed to be used for one specific thing. Okay, you can use it now. And that I think there's just something nice about giving the characters, or giving your players a choice right now, the second that they have to do, and they have to take it or not.
If there's a paradise-esque pool of water with magical effects, why is it there, and who is protecting it? Whys are always fantastic questions, because at the end of the day, the D&D world is full of evil. It is a horrible, terrible place of necromancy and corruption and devils and all kinds of stuff. So things are going to want to protect these natural effects. So yeah, you've got to think about this. If your party are not of a good alignment, or maybe you've got bad intentions, then something will be there. I like the idea that, the picture sort of has a pool that's carved into the root system of the giant tree. I like to imagine the tree itself is like a huge ent, or some sort of protector that could like reach over and pluck people from the water and just crush them or something.
No. Well, yeah, that's more brutal than I thought. I was like, tree ents are very sweet and they'll just pop you. No, you're just like, and crush with the roots. Gone. Done. Yep. Take that. But yeah, there's several different effects that you can have. Like some of the ones I sort of put down, quite a lot of them are good effects, I think. So you've got like +1 to AC. You've got every sentence that you say rings with lyrical splendor. So advantage on charisma checks for the next 24 hours. That's pretty good. Spider climb, grows a tail, which is more of a flavorful one, I think. It has no benefits in games, but apparently it acts on its own, and it sort of shows emotion, which is like... Yep. Take that as what you will.
Love it. You become your own fairy. It's fantastic. And everyone's happy.
You get stuff like growing flowers from your head, an extra eye stalk or two, like 1d4 eye stalks grows from your head, so you get advantage on perception checks. And all of these things last for about 24 hours-ish. There's nothing bad compared to some of the other phenomena. There's no like real negative. I guess here it's more trying to talk about, well, you know, like it's a good place, but why? So I guess when it talks about if you come to a place that's tainted, I guess there's an expectation that you as players are going to try and reverse the pollution in some way. So there's no negative or cursed effects compared to maybe some of the other ones we come to later on. But yeah, again, all these things are pretty cool, pretty fairy-like. You've got the one that's a donkey's ears one, which again, advantage on perception checks, but very much reminiscent of the Midsummer Night's Dream and all that sort of thing. So definitely magical, fairy, light, bath. Hooray.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, the temporary effect it gives you the ability to have a little bit of fun with it and mess around, and players enjoy this sort of randomness. Actually, the next option we've got plays on this idea very thematically, because and I read this one and I thought, oh dear, here we go. This is D&D dropping down everyone's cool and hip and taking drugs. Just because it's just a chapter called Magic Mushrooms. And I thought,
mushrooms. Yes.
That's just delightful. That's brilliant. Tell us about these.
So Magic Mushrooms, it says right at the top, this is probably one of the better written D&D books, because it's just so beautifully inspiring with every sort of sentence they have. So it's like, mushrooms can be deadly, delicious, or both. And I'm like, yep, pretty much. And it talks about, compared to when we talked about the springs from before, these magical springs, which are probably in areas, maybe not necessarily underground, but in some beautiful aspects. These mushrooms these are obviously fungus or fungi that has been infused with magical energy, but will be in places like the Underdark or the Feywild. So places which are a bit darker in sense of maybe tone, but also sort of like there is definitely more of there's something else at play here. There is definitely a hidden agenda somewhere.
Yeah.
And again, I quite like this in the sense of it talks about how do you identify what kind of mushroom, what mushrooms do what. And it talks about creatures who are proficient in medicine, nature, or survival might be, versed in it. So they might be able to tell you like, oh, this one doesn't kill you, for example, but only an expert can identify an unknown variety. Again, it doesn't really talk about like, if you use the identify spell, for example, does that make you an expert in it or not? Because they do have magical properties to a certain extent. But I think it's quite nice to be able to challenge your players to like, there are some mushrooms here. And they go, well, I pick it. Can I tell what it is? And you go, do you know anything about fungi? And if they say to you, why, yes, I've taken drugs for many years, or I am back home, my background is the mushroom expert or something like that, you'd be like, of course. But most of the time, I think it's that sort of thing where you're like, you pick something up from the ground. Are you going to eat it then and there? And I just love that people go, I'm not sure. So yeah, it's that sort of thing where it's something that's different and weird, but it's something that compared to maybe taking a bath in the water, actually you can only gain the benefits, in quotation marks, from eating these mushrooms.
You've got enough information to tell you that it's safe enough that the DM's not going to kill your character immediately, but they're not going to necessarily tell you exactly what it does. So you have that element of randomness and chance that comes with it, and the risk that your character may cluck and croon like a chicken for an hour, which would be amazing to role play. It's the reason that you've never allowed a Kenku character in your party. Exactly the same thing. Watching one of your players pretend to be a chicken for an hour and then going, you can remove the curse, and they're saying, nope, I don't want to.
I've done it. I've made my bed. I'm lying in it. So there's stuff like you said, the chicken noise is one way you will talk like a chicken for like an hour, but also understand chickens, which I thought was great. There's a game called Divinity Original Sin where the whole side quest is about dealing with chickens and talking to them and stuff, which you can only do if you do a certain number of little skills beforehand, which is hilarious. The other ones I thought were quite interesting to note. Obviously, you've got stuff like understands all languages for 1d4 days. So again, could be quite useful. Time stop. So you just cast the spell time stop on you when you eat it. And I had to look this up because I'd never heard of this spell. It's a 9th level spell where time stops for everyone by yourself for 1d4 plus 1 rounds. It ends only early if you do an action that affects another creature or an object worn by another creature, or if you move 1,000 feet away from the area. And I just have visions of, do you remember that old TV show called Bernard's Watch, where Bernard had a watch that could stop time?
I do.
Yeah, that's exactly what I see here, because it's not necessarily, you can't necessarily do like a hit on someone, or you create a lot of damage. You could, but then that's time stopped. So if you've got 5 rounds, which is 5 times 6 is 30. Sorry, that took way too long to do. But 30 seconds, what do you do in 30 seconds?
The time stop spell is one of those weird 9th level spells where there are entire spiels on the internet about all the stuff you can do in 30 seconds or less if you've rolled badly on the dice. And it seems like most of the uses of the spell involve being the ultimate get out of jail card, because you cast it, you go, I'm losing this fight, and you dimension door away, and then you teleport away from dimension door out location, and you're doing all these things. But if you were to cast it accidentally, it would be such a waste of a large ability that your character would just be walking around with the world stopped around them, and they wouldn't necessarily realize what has happened until afterwards when they go, yes, that was quite powerful. Maybe I should have saved that.
It's like, shit. Yes, absolutely. The other one I quite liked for flavor was magical mist pours out of your eyes and ears to create fog cloud for an hour. But again, and it focuses on the player as well. So you're walking around for a bloody hour with this fog cloud, but you probably can't see. And it's probably quite scary as a result. You're like just seeing this every orifice, this horrible mist coming out of you. And you're like, what's wrong?
Is it a cloudy day? Is anyone seeing this? No.
All of these are mostly out of combat benefits or a flavorsome. So obviously there's one right at the beginning, which is like permanent change of skin color, but it's like you are changing to a bright color. So you can't necessarily hide as well or anything like that. There's only one that is regaining hit points, which I thought was pretty good. But other than that, there are all lots of fun ones. But again, I would love it if there was some sort of like disadvantage to it, because these are all little fun things, which I quite like. There's one later on, which is more about like, there's definitely a problem or a consequence for eating these. I think the magic mushroom one and the Enchanted Springs, it'd be great to have, these are all the good things, but there's also consequences. So having a consequence table would be really good, because who eats shit from the floor?
Well, that's the idea of giving a benefit with a curse, like retaining the balance to any gift that you give. I like that as an idea, because you can play around with that. You can give players a continual choice of, are you going to take this benefit knowing what it will cost you, and you're going to do this yourself? And I think you've always got the flexibility to change the aspects of whatever effect that you're picking up to tweak it in one way or another. That you have a DM, you can choose. Maybe you can come up with your own effects, but have a similar or tweaked effect. Ultimately, one of these things casts a 9th level spell. So I'm sure you can think of something that would be quite fun.
Yes, absolutely.
So, we've basically been wasting 40 minutes to get to this point, which is the most important point, because I read the next one and I was just slightly confused. So maybe you want to help explain this one to me. So,
out of Dungeons and Dragons, obviously you have your dungeons, you have your dragons, but what else is like a really prominent thing? No, it's not owlbears. No, it's not gelatinous cubes. It's mimics. There's that horrible joke, or not horrible, but that old sort of well-used joke, because everything is a mimic. Everyone laughs, the table laughs, you kill the table, it's a mimic. It's one of those things where I think it's one that early on where you're like, I'm just going to open this chest, and then the chest opens with a lot of teeth, and you go, shit, and then it eats you. I just think this is really cool. So the idea of a mimic colony. So we've talked before about like mind flayers and other monstrous races living together as a group, as a society. And why not? Why not is the catchphrase of this podcast, is why not mimics? These creatures are like ones that are a bit rarer than maybe the typical mimic that you just find in the dungeon. Usually you just find one or two lying around. They are kind of like a parasite, aren't they? They're waiting for the food to come and then eating them. Yeah. These creatures develop a sort of an understanding of the world, almost like their intelligence go up a little bit, and they can communicate with others. And so that means they are organized. Yeah. They band together to create these colonies and create larger objects, and so they can formulate sort of right, let's pretend to be a tavern for a bit, and so they do. And I just that is just such a cool thing, that everything is a mimic. Why not?
Putting that to one side and talking about the mechanics briefly of it's interesting, because effectively it creates a layer action where you can get the mimics to interfere with a regular fight in some way. What it doesn't do, which I find is the intriguing thing, is that it doesn't give a stat block to the mimic colony itself. So I assume you just put mimics of various sizes from the monster manual into the book and work from there, and sort of that's all fine and exciting and everything, and it's up to you to create an environment, and then this just effectively makes it a little bit more complicated, a little bit harder. But the one thing that I'd find amazing, because you look at some of these layer actions of help action. It's basically the colony can use the help action as things spring from nothing, like arms and legs start to like poke people, or it can spit acid from walls and stuff. And all of that is explained by the picture, which I think has to be the best picture in D&D so far.
Ever.
Like, this is my favorite picture because everything about it is just wonderful. It's two very happy old ladies sitting and having tea, looking out onto this beautiful plain with what appears to be like, is that bison or cows or something,
I think so,
out there. Yeah. And I think there's a little cake on a plate, and one's got her shoes off and she's just relaxing, and one's got a headscarf off, and they're all very happy, and it's all very lovely. And just looking through this, so the teapot is a mimic, the teacup is a mimic. It looks like both their chairs are mimics. The rug is a mimic. The chest, flower pots, and hanging baskets are mimics. And it looks like not only the ground and the veranda and the whole building they're sitting in is also a mimic. How did they get here? Are the people also mimics? Have they been caught and trapped? Are they just about to get eaten? No one knows, but it is just, it's the most beautiful picture. I love it.
Yeah, I agree. This is like my firm favorite in this whole book. I think it's just that idea of like, how did they get here? What has happened? Like the idea that mimics have bonded together, to have unionized to create whole villages. And it reminds me a little bit of something that I did, which I'd stolen from our friend Sam, was that he created a tavern which had an oblex in it. Now, oblexes are slightly different to mimics, but they make sort of almost doppelgangers of you. They just take your memories and then they can make you as a person. I would love to see like a whole tavern which is made of mimics but is run by an oblex who has lots of people like moving around, so it looks like a genuine thing that people are working together and other monstrous races are working together. Everything about it is cool, but one thing that is really cool compared to the other sort of colony I would compare this to is maybe like a mind flayer colony where everyone's working together and everyone's on the same page, compared to the mind flayers who are very, let's put it this way, they will mind blast you and eat you pretty much straight away. Here, mimics, they are aware of their own weaknesses, and if you confront a colony and they know they're overwhelmed or the threat of the existence, they will either flee or they will try bargaining. And I just love this idea that they'll bargain it with either information like, oh, there's previous adventures that came here, they said this, and give that information to escape, give treasure from their prior, in brackets, food that they've just like, we've kept, which I love, or even give up one of their young. So you have the stat blocks for a juvenile mimic. And again, talking about sidekicks, why not have a juvenile mimic? Why not?
Exactly. There's so much mystery here. I just don't understand, and I love it. I love it so much. The idea of having someone's going to come along soon, I think, and say, can I have a juvenile mimic? What's it, familiar of some kind?
Oh, yeah.
Like, fine. I guess it is challenge rating 0, but still, like, it's just nuts. I just don't know how to react to any of that. Let's move on to something a bit more sensible.
What?
Sensible.
Fair.
This picture, again, it shows what appears to be a huge glowy tree with some cats with angel wings around it. So please explain what's going on here.
I will. So we've gone from mimics who are about to eat the food to something completely different, something alien. And as you said, this again, another incredible image here. This very gives off much Mad Max style vibes, I think. Like, again, the sort of dried husk trees. And these I can't say there's tressums. I don't know. Like you said, cats with wings. Yeah, like they are very, very cute. They're a bit more aggressive in early editions, I've heard, but very, very cute from this image. But yes, this talks about primal fruits of wild places that aren't necessarily forests, but can be anywhere, which are brimming over with sort of nature's organic power. So you've stuff like gardens that are tended to by like eccentric wizards, or groves that have been blessed or touched by divine providence. And these trees, these foliage, this whatever, produces fruits with magic. So I could imagine even cactuses or cacti producing these sort of fruits. So very similar to how the springs worked, i.e. like if you take some water, it will lose its magical properties. Here it's made clear that not every fruit that has been born out of these places has magic in it. but shows signs of it. So you can describe it as the fruit from these trees or from these bushes have more vibrant colors, or the colors shift and change. Like if you imagine like the metallic colors on cars.
It's obvious. Whatever it is, it's glowing and it's on fire. You know the one. Exactly.
On fire, glow in the dark, etc. And there's maybe even a soft hum that emanates from it. I thought those are really cool.
It sings the Bohemian Rhapsody when you get close to it, just softly, backwards.
Yeah. The one bit I did quite like is that sometimes they may be peculiar to touch. So I just suddenly had that image of like you picking off, I don't know, like an orange or an orange type fruit, but the skin of it feels like velvet or Velcro. That sort of like real.
Oh no, that actually disturbs me more than most other stuff. Oh, could you imagine? I would just feel like it was. Have you ever touched a really moldy orange before? One that's really turned and it gets furry and squidgy.
No, why would I? Because I'd see that. I don't touch things.
I mean, I totally have never had such an orange in my possession ever, so really? I don't know what it feels like either. But you know,
yes.
And the thing I love about Primal Fruit is that it ticks that box that we were just talking about, which is something that gives both a curse and a boon of some kind. And specifically, it very obviously mentions if you identify a piece of fruit, you get the good bit, but you don't reveal the curse, which actually is something of the identify spell that people forget quite often. Identify does not reveal curses, or that something is cursed. And some of these things are just delightful. It's, I mean, did any of these like tickle your fancy when you look through them?
Absolutely. So yeah, some of these are definitely like ones that you go, I'm going to eat this right now and just hope for the best. They definitely do feel more combat-esque. The one that really stood out for me was the Death Ward one. So you start eating it, euphoric visions of bright light swim through the creature's mind. The creature gains the benefit of the Death Ward spell for 8 hours and must succeed on a DC 13 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned through that duration. So the idea, you just feel constantly unwell, but you can't die. It sounds like the worst hangover ever. That's what I see this.
That's exactly what it is. You're so high, you actually can't do anything straight and sensibly. It is totally bad. But what about one of these waves of vitality crash over the creature, which increases your hit point maximum by 2d10 and lasts until you finish a long rest. And there's this little thing where you may have to take a DC 15 charisma saving throw or be cursed with a random form of lycanthropy. Isn't that just wonderful? Because wouldn't it be great if your really annoying player who picks the fruit and eats it without thinking about it, fails the check, and suddenly, bam, were-rat? Isn't that great?
That says a lot about you. Go, yes, were-rat, rather than anything like slightly up there. But yeah, I completely agree. And that, I feel like, is the worst disadvantage you can have for some of these. Like, most of them are like, you regain hit points, but then shed bright light for an hour, which can be useful, but also it's like, oh, well, there they are. The advantages on attack rolls that uses strength, but at the same time, once that ends, you get a level of exhaustion. The one that I really enjoyed as well was it doesn't require food, drink, or sleep for 1d4 days, but the dreams that you have intrude on your waking thoughts, so it makes you have disadvantage on perception checks because you just see all these visions from what happens when you stay up too late and you just go into that sort of state where it's sort of a bit manic and stuff. So I like that. And again, the other cool thing is that you have these fruit when you pick it. So it's 1d6 fruits that has this magical properties when you pick them, and they remain potent for a week. So they don't go off quickly, but they remain edible throughout. So you're like, oh, you've lost it, but you can use it instead of your rations. And they can be eaten, squeezed into a juice, or cooked, which I thought was great.
Your players may be on a January juice diet. You have to respect that. And maybe they don't need solid food. It's a magical primal protein shake, and that is wonderful. Delicious. I love it.
With the velvety skin as well.
Oh, yes. No, don't. Now, the last one.
Yes.
I love this one because have you read, what is it called? Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell?
Ooh, I saw the TV show. The BBC adaptation is really good. Yes, okay. I know of it.
Exactly. To people who have read it or don't know it, for instance, it is a story all about old magic and the Fae and how England has been changed over hundreds of years, where once it was this sort of weird, dark, magical place ruled by primal forces, and then eventually it's become industrialized and everyone's kind of forgotten about that aspect to it. But something that it brings into the game, where these Fae roads or old ancient roads that will not necessarily linearly work on a map. It will start in one place and end somewhere totally different that makes no sense. Like you will walk through the road and you will appear 300 miles away on the other side of this road, and 17 years will have passed and you're suddenly like unaware of the change. Just random things like that. And these unearthly roads, this last thing that it sort of brings in, I feel like these tickle that brilliant old magic, ancient pathway sort of aspect to the world.
So they're described as having these like currents of magic running through the realm, invisible and almost archery-like, which again, I'm like, oh, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And yeah, connecting those sort of different bits of lands and stuff. For me, actually, I, again, thinking of like Netherware, which is the Neil Gaiman book about London, there's a thing called the floating market, and you can get there through other means, and it changes where it is every single time. And that's what it is. It can be used as a sort of trade route or shift, and they can change where they go in response to a noteworthy time, like the different phases of the moon or an anniversary or something. But for me, the real cool thing I have, and again, this is where I was like, oh, this could be used if you wanted to do more of, let's say, a Harry Potter type of transportation using a pool key or anything like that. There are these things called keys, which you may need to get onto these roads, so a way to pass through. So it gives examples of like spilling a bit of blood on an archway, or as you do, calling the name of a specific archway 3 times. So you're doing your Bloody Marys there. But my favorite one is right at the end, is that you just happen to be the descendant of a legendary hero, and that's how you can use these roads, but nobody else can. And I love that sort of thing. If you are struggling to think about it, if you've not read Mr. Norrell and Doctor Strange, that's not the book at all, but I know which one I'm in. If you've watched or read any Scott Pilgrim, Ramona Flowers, the sort of protagonist's aim to get, it's a good film, but there's problematic things when you look back at it. What she does, because she is a delivery person, she uses the gateway in between people's minds to make short hops to deliver Amazon parcels. So Scott Pilgrim wakes up in the dream and he sees Ramona Flowers like skating across, and she says, "You just happen to have a convenient one in your head. Sorry," and he moves along. And that's how I always see it, is that it's just convenient places where people can use their own beings, and adventurers might just stumble upon them. And
I love that idea. I've never heard of that before, but that is hilarious and is worrying, because the chances of Amazon at some point employing that into the real world is worryingly high.
Yes.
They will find a way. The Alexas in your house will suddenly be gateways to the mental psychic realm.
Yeah. Alexa, open Unearthly Road to Whole Foods. I don't know.
I can't do that. I need a pint of humanoid blood. Oh,
Damn
sorry,
it.
Alexa. Right, hang on. Right. Gertie, get here.
Gertie. Oh no, not poor Gertie.
Yes. It's all imaginative, creative points for you to throw into things, and you could take any one of these sort of phenomenon and stick it into a one shot. You could stick them into a campaign. They don't need to be the center of a story. They can just be a little offshoot of a session, some sort of little side note, something interesting. You could put all manners of creatures, monsters, players that just happen to inhabit these things. You could have, there's all kinds of places. So, the storms are cool in the sense that you could just imagine standing on the deck of a ship and looking out and seeing one of these things approaching, or across a primal tree, and you look at it and it's totally not in the direction you're going, and you're like, what is that? And then there's that moment where you think, do I sidetrack and go and have a look at this, or do I just totally ignore it? And then you're like, yeah, cool, ignored, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just ways to have opportunities into your games. And yeah, like I said, for the Storms one, I was thinking proper, because obviously you and I have been playing a little bit of Sea of Thieves recently, and all that I can just imagine, like with Necrotic Tempest, just things coming up and you're like, well, shit, and then turn about on the helm and everything like that. So yeah, absolutely.
So that was a lot to digest, and my brain is going mad. So whilst I consider all of this until the next episode, where can we find you? What are you up to at the moment?
What am I up to at the moment? Well, Ryan, I am the host of What Am I Rolling, a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it's going very well. I have lots
always going very well. I
have lots of editing to do. I have games to run, and everything's ticking along really well, actually. I feel content. So that's always good. I'm sure next episode, or the next time we talk, it will be like, oh God, what have I done this to myself? More Warhammer, more random things I have to learn off the top of my head. So yeah. What about you, Ryan? Where can we find you?
Oh, come to Discord. Discord's where you can chat with me. I have the UrsaRyan Discord where we have a big community of people that talk about all kinds of rubbish. Come and inflict some D&D on the community. It would be really good fun. And if you ever fancy Civ 6 as a computer game, that's what I tend to do a lot of my time with. Come to YouTube, find UrsaRyan, and you can come and see me there. But as I say, I do lots of D&D stuff with Fee, so I'll be around lurking in the corners.
With your mushrooms, clearly.
Exactly, with the mushrooms that glow, and suddenly I have a... Hang on, the tail was the pool, wasn't it? I was thinking like a big furry tail that's popping in. Maybe I went for a bath beforehand. I'm clucking like a chicken. Let's do that.
Just do all the things. You have a piece of primal fruit, a mushroom, and you're in the bath.
Oh my god, it'd be some bath. It would be some bath. Right. Until then, everybody, next time we will catch you, and yeah, looking forward to it. See you in a bit.
Bye.